Hello, Las Vegas members. Greetings from Dallas, Texas. I'm happy to be invited to share with you a presentation I delivered in Korea for Father Sik Seonghwa on Korean unification. We're coming live from Dallas, where your region is having a great gathering. There have been a lot of inspiring talks so far, and I'm very pleased to be able to share what I was able to share in Korea at the Hyojeong Academy of Arts and Sciences. So please enjoy the presentation. I hope it'll bring you some inspiration. Thank you so much. I'm going to do four things. The first is the True Parents' philosophy of reunification. Then I want to look at the promise of Korea. If Korea unifies, how Korea will become a driver of global development, in other words, a world-leading country. So we have the notion of, central history and peripheral history, right? So what we've been talking about so far is kind of central history, the core of the core centered on True Parents. What I'm going to talk about is sort of the macro history surrounding True Parents, but God is moving that macro history also, and convergence with True Parents ministry. So that's what I'm interested in. So the promise of a unified Korea as a driver of global development. On the other hand, the perils of the two Koreas failing to unify. So I want to talk about the promise if they do unify, the perils if they don't unify, and finally the vision of a heavenly Korea, which is a concept that True Mother has introduced. What will that look like in reality? Okay, so that's what I want to deal with. Oops. So I want to connect True Parents' vision of Korean unification with realities on the ground. So True Parents, going backwards, this way. Good. All right, so True Parents gave a speech in the year 2000. It was titled North-South Unification and World Unification Will Be Accomplished Through True Love. And this was given on Father's 80th birthday in 21 rallies for the unification of North and South Korea in Korea. And afterwards, True Mother delivered the same message in Japan. And this speech expresses their basic philosophy of North-South unification, number one, and world unification, number two. So what is True Parents? Looks like I have to hit it twice to make it move. True Parents' philosophy of North-South unification. The core principle expressed in this speech is that the starting point on the path to heaven is within the enemy country. So we have North Korea, South Korea, enemy countries. The starting path for both of them is within the enemy country. How do you then apply that core principle? And in the same speech, they gave the answer. South Koreans must emerge who love North Korea more than their country. Also, North Koreans must emerge who love South Korea more than their country. The movement for the unification of North and South Korea begins with both sides have such a heart toward each other. I truly want to live with them. I do not want to die unless with them. I do not want to live unless with them. That's what true love is, okay? So that's the philosophy of North-South unification. What about world unification? Oops. Trouble here. So for True Parents, the significance of Korean unification goes well beyond Korea. First, it'll be the final act bringing the global Cold War to a conclusion and a blueprint for the unification of the world. We can resolve the North-South problem in Korea. That could be a blueprint for resolving and reconciling other problems. And secondly, Father has always preached that Korea is in the position to provide a platform for the oceanic civilization and the continental civilizations to fuse together into a new global civilization. So that's the significance on the global level of the Koreas uniting. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is True Parents' philosophy of unification, North-South and globally. So can we find evidence that'll back up Chuparin's basic position? The promise of a unified Korea as a driver of global development. What kind of world leadership potential does Korea have? And I want to look at this in 5 areas. That would be economy, technology and technological innovation, transportation infrastructure, culture, and politics. So I'm going to run through each of these in terms of what is Korea's world leadership potential. Start with the economy, and the most optimistic appraisal of Korea's economic future as a unified nation, that is North and South together, was a 2009 global economics paper published by Goldman Sachs. Have you heard of Goldman Sachs? Sure. It's a New York international multi-level bank. And so they're very particular about where they put their money. And this was a study that these are the conclusions of Goldman Sachs. So it carries some weight. And their study assumed a peaceful and gradual economic integration between North and South rather than a German-style reunification. You know, in Germany, the wall came down, the two were shoved together immediately. That's not the assumption here, but they assume more of a gradual integration. And they emphasize the synergies, that is, the mutually reinforcing qualities of South Korea capital and technology. That's what they bring to the table. North Korea brings natural resources and labor, okay? So thinking about North Korea actually has abundant mineral resources. They have large deposits of minerals valued at 140 times their GDP, gross domestic product, while South Korea has virtually no mineral resources. And they import about 97% of their energy and mineral resources that they use. Wow. So North Korea, rich mineral resources, South Korea, no mineral resources. That sounds like a good coming together. Most of the 6 strategic metals for South Korea, minerals, coal, uranium, iron, copper, steel, and nickel, are all abundant in North Korea. So that's a synergy. They see that as a synergy. On the other, at the same time, North Korea has rich human capital. The study refers to their abundant and competitive labor force. More than 1/3 of North Korea's population, 37%, lives in rural areas. So this is about the same percentage that lived in rural areas at the very point that South Korea was ready to take off in terms of its great economic growth in the 1970s, about the same percentage. Also, the labor force in North Korea could increase substantially because they have a huge military, right? About 1.3 million, or 16% of the males between 15 and 64 are in the military. So if that military isn't necessary anymore, then those numbers come into the labor force. Pre-college education is compulsory, so relatively educated. And I don't know if you know the Kaesong Industrial Complex. It's north of the border. It's a joint enterprise of the South and the North. The experience at Kaesong suggests that North Korean workers have a strong work ethic and good potential for productivity. And also, finally, North Korea's population is growing roughly twice as fast as the South. So these refers to North Korea's rich human capital. The conclusion of Goldman Sachs' study is this. They say a united Korea could overtake France, Germany, and possibly Japan in 30 to 40 years in terms of their GDP, gross domestic product, should the growth potential of North Korea be realized. This would put the size of a united Korea in 2050 firmly on a par with or in excess of that of most of the G7 countries except for the United States. Wow. So in economic terms, a unified Korea going forward 30 to 40 years will be a major force in the global economy. Okay, so that's number 1, economy. Number 2, technology and technological innovation. So South Korea is already a world leader in technology and technological innovation. In 2017, it had the fastest average internet connection speed in the world. It ranks as one of the world's most wired countries, with virtually every household having broadband access. In 2010, the number of mobile phones operating in South Korea exceeded the population. That means they have a 100% penetration rate on mobile phones. And South Korea has been the top-rated country in the Bloomberg Innovation Index for the past 5 years. So already South Korea is a global leader. As a global leader, South Korea is beginning to focus its technology on social needs, not just economic potential. One model project that's consistent with True Parents' concern for the environment is the International Business District in Songdo City. And so this International Business District is trying to eliminate the need for cars, prioritizing green space, clean air, and efficient management of resources. Every apartment building and business is located within 10 minutes of a bus or subway stop. And they even have pneumatic tubes that suck the trash out of apartment buildings and other places. So you don't need garbage trucks going around picking up garbage, because you just put it in the tube and it sucks it away to wherever it goes. And in this Songdo City, greenhouse gas emissions are 1/3 the amount of comparably sized cities. And this is an image of Songdo City. So you see the green space there right in the center and so forth. Okay, move to transportation infrastructure. Now, transportation infrastructure is very important. It's likely that the world's transportation infrastructure will shape geopolitics in the 21st century. And this is very consistent with True Father's viewpoint. If in the Peace-Loving Global Citizen, he wrote, when a road is built, it changes the course of history. The world can physically be bound as one. The road will make it so. So Father, that's why he advanced an international peace highway, right? So Father sees the significance of transportation infrastructure for global integration and world peace. So one of the interesting things in the 20th century has been the tremendous acceleration of global transportation networks since the end of the Cold War. The most important development is the rebirth of a new Silk Road linking China to Central Asia and even Western Europe. So actually, before the time of Jesus, there was an ancient Silk Road where merchants could travel from China to the Mediterranean as part of the preparation for the first Advent. Now again, we're seeing a rebirth of a modern Silk Road extending from the east to the west. So building on this, China announced a Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, in 2013. And this BRI includes a land-based Silk Road economic belt and an ocean-based maritime sea belt. I'm going to show you a map or two in a minute. This is one of the largest infrastructure investments in human history, covering more than 68 countries, including 65% of the world's population and 40% of the world's wealth. This is a simple version of China's BRI, Belt and Road. The orangey part is the overland route, the red is the sea route, but that's really a simplification. There's actually 6 economic corridors extending from China into Central Asia, Europe, and East Africa. So you've got the North China-Mongolia economic corridor, the North Eurasia land bridge, the Bangladesh, et cetera, et cetera. This would be another vision of it. So you see the black coming out of China are the Silk Road initiatives, and the blue is the water. So China, in red, is attempting to position itself as at the center of the world, as the center of Eurasia, basically. Everything comes into and out of China. Countries impacted by the BRI, you see, this is the 65%, 68 nations, 65% of the world's population, etc. But one thing you notice if you look at this map, do you notice anything if you look at this map? Who's missing? I don't see Korea, I don't see Japan as part of this initiative, do you? They're absent. What is Korea's place? China's BRI transportation infrastructure does not include North Korea, South Korea, or Japan. But a united Korea is an essential component of meaningful Eurasian integration. How can you integrate Eurasia without Japan, South Korea, and North Korea? And South Korea's president, Moon Jae-in, recognizes this, the importance of these transportation links. And at the Inter-Korean Summit, the first summit he had with Kim Jong-un on April 27th last year, he handed Kim Jong-un a thumb drive containing a new economic map of the Korean Peninsula. And this map is based on a plan to modernize North Korea's antiquated railroads and create an inter-Korea railway system. So this is sort of what it would look like. It comes down both sides, the east side and the west side, and then it's kind of like an H, and then it crosses over in the middle. So integrating the two systems, then it can link up with the Trans-Siberian Railroad and the Chinese railroad systems. Northeast Asia is a dominant economic region. It represents a quarter of the world's gross national product and is expected to be one of the leading economic blocs of the 21st century, along with the European Union and North America. If you link up Korea and Japan, you'll establish the basis for a Beijing-Seoul-Tokyo transportation corridor linking 6 megacities. That means cities with more than 10 million population when you link them up. Korea will link to Russia's Trans-Siberian Railroad and be an eastern extension of China's BRI rail system. So a fully linked Eurasian railroad system would look more like this. So you'd include, you see it goes down through the Koreas and then across into Japan. So Father's been pushing the Japan-Korea Tunnel project, and the Koreas need to link up their railroad systems. Otherwise, Korea cannot fulfill its destiny, which is to link the ocean and the continent. How about in the area of culture? So we've covered economy, technology, and transportation. Now we go to culture. One of the remarkable developments of the 21st century has been the surge of popularity of Korean culture in the world. Have you heard of the Korean wave? Refers to massively popular Korean TV dramas, K-pop, and a variety of cultural products that are quite influential in China, Japan, Southeast Asia, but also India, the Middle East, Central Asia, Iran, Israel, Turkey, Russia, even the Americas and Europe. So this is not trivial. It's an example of what, political scientists call soft power. The influence that states can exert simply by being popular and well-liked. So maybe you remember Psy's Gangnam Style a few years ago. It was the first YouTube video to reach 1 billion views. Even Obama and other people were referring to this, and people in America were doing the dance and so forth. Also, these recent books have come out. The Birth of Korean Cool, How One Nation is Conquering the World Through Pop Culture. Another one, A Geek in Korea, Discovering Asia's New Kingdom of Cool. So this is in the area of culture where Korea is expanding its influence. Oops, wrong way. We expect this influence to continue. Korea has several advantages in the realm of culture. Number one, unlike China or Japan, it has an advantage in Asia because it doesn't have a history of aggressive colonialism. Both China and Japan have histories of colonialism and aggressiveness. So there's suspicion about them, but Korea doesn't have that history. It also has an advantage in Middle Eastern and African cultures because Korea is still somewhat culturally conservative, and so that enables Korea to explore family issues and changing values in ways that are acceptable to these traditional cultures, unlike the United States, where our cultural products are kind of unacceptable to traditional societies. But Korea's are not. And also Korea's past history of Han, or shame, of foreign domination have helped to shape it as a super achieving, super ambitious nation. Its determination to be the best of the best suggests that its cultural influence will continue to grow. Go to politics now. So while Korea's been divided, it's been a vortex of global confrontation. As a unified nation, Korea will be in a position to assert leadership. Currently, the great powers are at loggerheads. Who are the great powers? Primarily China and the United States. Russia is a little step behind. So China's Belt and Road Initiative that I was talking about is trying to draw the whole Eurasian continent into its sphere of influence. And then the United States started this Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, if you remember that. What is TPP? It's an effort to contain China. Trans-Pacific Partnership. The U.S. tried to ally with nations around the Pacific Rim and the East to try to contain China. But neither of these strategies seem to be working right now. The Belt and Road Initiative of China is encountering resistance, especially from India and some other countries that don't want to be part of it. And the United States, under Donald Trump, has withdrawn from TPP. The United States is not a part of TPP. So BRI is struggling, TPP is struggling. That's why Korea can become what's called a pivot state. A unified Korea will fit the profile of being a pivot state. What's a pivot state? It's a nation that is able to build profitable relationships with multiple major powers without becoming overly reliant on any one of them. So North Korea and South Korea come together. North Korea has relationships with China historically and Russia. South Korea has relationships with Japan and the United States. So Korea can be a hub. Opportunity to be a hub state of Asia, bridging the Eurasian continent and seas, fostering genuinely multilateral relations and prosperities. So all of this depends on three things. To accomplish, three things have to be done. Number one, North and South Korea have to end their hostilities. They're still in a state of war from the Korean War. It's just a truce. It's not a peace. They have to end hostilities, and they have to formally sign a peace treaty ending the Korean War, number one. Number two, they have to denuclearize the peninsula. And number three, they have to develop some formula for eventual reunification. It doesn't have to be immediate, but it has to be some formula for reunification.
I was told when I left Korea that number one on that list was they had a goal to accomplish that this year.
Hopefully. Well, I think in the next 3 years, between 2018 and 2020, I think we'll see some significant developments. The Panmunjom Declaration, when Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un met for the first time in April, the interesting thing about that declaration, they affirmed each one of these principles. That declaration affirms each one of these principles. This is them signing that declaration. At the same time, we have to manage expectations. Previous leaders have affirmed similar principles only to see commitments broken and promises unfulfilled. Maybe we in the central history have to fulfill our responsibility so the larger peripheral history can fulfill its responsibility. So people have gotten enthusiastic about it. Some have proposed constructing a DMZ peace park, for example, or having an Asian UN headquarters there, or a multinational city near the borders of Korea, Russia, and China as ways of dramatizing Korea as a model for resolving these intractable conflicts. These are good ideas, but they should not minimize the challenges that remain or the consequences of failure. That's why I want to turn to the second point. This is the consequences of not unifying, or what I call the perils of the two Koreas failing to unify. And in this area, I see 4 threats. The first threat would be, these are South Korea's population crisis, economic uncertainty, isolation from global transportation networks, and the possibility of war. So just again to go through each of these. The South Korea population crisis. Did you know that South Korea has a population crisis? Yes. Fertility rate is miserable. The demographic situation in South Korea is dire. In 2017, South Korea recorded its lowest fertility rate ever and has been the lowest fertility rate country for 16 years in a row. In 1980, there were 5.7 million students in elementary schools in South Korea. Today, there are 3 million, nearly half as many. That's why some of the universities are closing in Korea, because there's not students to populate them. According to Statistics Korea, the current population of 50 million will start to decline sometime between 2020 and 2030, and by 2060, it will have plummeted to somewhere between 34 and 44 million. From 50 million today. By then, South Korea will be a country full of old people. Half the population will be over 60, and only a fifth will be under 30. What are the solutions? Did you want to say?
Maybe it's coming up.
Maybe it's coming up.
There'll be time, but
Yeah, we can have some discussion after this is over. Solutions. So other countries have low birth rates also. And what do? They usually look to immigration to supplement the native-born who are not being born. All right, so they immigration. But South Korea is reluctant to admit foreigners, so this worsens the problem. Without meaningful immigration or reunification with the North, that's another solution, by the way, some say that this declining trend cannot be reversed. So if they don't unify, and if South Korea doesn't have immigration, this trend cannot be reversed. It's already gone too far. All right, the second issue is economic uncertainty. So South Korea rose from being one of the poorest countries in the world to a developed, high-income country in a single generation, right? Had some help from the U.S., but anyway. Nevertheless, the economy faces 4 problems. One of this is the economy is entirely built on an export. It's an export economy. In other words, they're exporting products and they're receiving money. 46% of the GDP of Korea is based on exports, compared to only 13% of the U.S. Even Japan, only 18% of their economy is based on exports. China, 22%. So a very high percentage. Also, Chinese companies are starting to catch up to Korea in terms of their expertise, and they can produce the same products at a lower price. That's a threat. A lack of diversity in their exports. Korea's exports are somewhat narrow range of products. 45% of it is electronics like Samsung and so forth. 21% are cars, boats, and parts. So when you're concentrated in a kind of narrow range of products, that means if the global market shifts, then it's a problem because you're not diversified. You're not protecting yourself that way. information and computer technology will eventually reach a saturation point, and then Korea has to find some other way. A third problem is lack of primary innovation. South Korea's competitive advantage has been making existing products more efficient and cheaper, more so than developing new products. So the emphasis has been on innovations that can be developed quickly, bali, rather than long-term reflection and fundamental research. And finally, pursuit of profit over people. In South Korea, they also have a trickle-down philosophy, like the US, some people have. The idea is that if the rich get rich, it'll trickle down to the poor. And so their policies have tended to support these large corporations, Hyundai, Samsung, and so forth. They're called chaebols. But it hasn't trickled down. And so this has resulted in a wealth gap and unemployment, which is a problem. So these are four problems in South Korea. What are the solutions? Number one, develop the domestic market. Not everything exported. Domestic market and service economy in the South. South Korea, even though it's up there in economy, it's number 17 out of 18 in terms of their service industry. That means internal services they provide. And Moon Jae-in, the current president, is pursuing a people-centered economy focused on job creation, income-led, and service sector growth. So they're trying to address this issue of developing the domestic economy, with people having more money in their pockets to spend. The second solution is to unify with the North. If they unify with the North, that will automatically diversify and expand the domestic market, because they'll provide products for the North. That will stimulate the economy in the South. Also, reunification will prevent the North from sliding into a semi-permanent tributary status with China. It's currently, and it's been for some time, like a tributary state to China, and it'll stay in that way unless something changes. Okay, so I covered economy and what was the first one? Oh, it's population problem. Now, isolation from global transportation networks. The fact is, South Korea is not really a peninsula nation. It's more almost like it's landlocked. It's landlocked by the North. It can't get through, okay? South Korea remains landlocked by the North. North Korea prevents highways, trains, and other forms of ground transportation from passing through. South Korea is limited to air and sea options for trade. This adds a lot of expense, hinders regional development, and blocks meaningful Eurasian integration. If they fail to link up their transportation networks, this will perpetuate polarization and risk economic isolation for both Koreas. So this is an example. This is Russia. Russia has proposed a direct link to Japan. Forget Korea. If they're going to mess around and not unify, we're just going to come across and we're going to go right across to the Sakhalin Island. This is Russia. I mean, they might cross here. Their railroad comes to here. They might build their railroad up to here. It's easy to get across and pop down there across to Hokkaido. And then Korea is left out. In other words, Korea is no longer the gateway to Asia. It just comes, all the raw materials from Siberia and Russia can go straight to Japan. Japan products can go straight to Russia and China, and Korea is left out. This would be an example of how the Trans-Siberian Railroad would then bypass Korea. So it'd come across here from Europe, all the way across here, pop up to Sakhalin Island and down to Japan, and Korea is left out of the picture. So that's a threat. That's a threat. Also, China is proposing a tunnel, an undersea tunnel from China to South Korea, which would then bypass North Korea, and North Korea would be disadvantaged. So because of frustration, because there's no link up, these other bigger countries are thinking about other alternatives. Okay, and the last challenge is the possibility of a second Korean War. So, in fact, both sides have been conducting military exercises in preparation of war since 1953. That's why you do military exercises, right? To prepare for the eventuality of war. So North Korea has an estimated 8,000 big guns embedded in hardened artillery sites just north of the DMZ, 40 miles from Seoul, and 700,000 ground forces and 2,000 tanks and 300 aircraft and over 40 surface warships and about 50 submarines, all within 100 miles of the DMZ. On the other hand, South Korea has in place a Korean massive punishment and retaliation plan, which includes decapitation of top North Korean leadership. And the United States has some 30,000 military personnel stationed in Korea, 40,000 in Japan, including the U.S. 7th Fleet, which is the main navy, and squadrons of long-range bombers from Guam. So they're all poised right there. And that's a kind of a dangerous situation. What would be the cost of a Korean conflict? In a word, catastrophic. A second Korean war would be catastrophic. Casualties in the larger Seoul metropolitan area alone may pass 100,000 in the first 48 hours. Even without the use of North Korean weapons of mass destruction, and 200,000 to 300,000 South Korean and U.S. military casualties in the first 90 days. Wow. These are military figures, not mine. North Korea could hit the South Korean capital with an astonishing 10,000 rockets per minute. The use of chemical or biological agents, of which North Korea is estimated to have 2,500 to 5,000 metric tons of chemical weapons, would drive the death and casualty total upwards exponentially, as would nuclear weapons. According to one analyst, a new war on the Korean Peninsula wouldn't be as bad as you think. It would be much, much worse. That's just showing some artillery practice by the North. The outcomes of a second Korea War. Some analysts suggest the primary objective of a North Korean invasion would be to capture and hold Seoul for as long as possible. It's not far away from the north, right? Relatively close. This would be an important propaganda victory and involve the South Korean army and the U.S. forces in a prolonged conflict, because that would be an urban warfare. You got lots of citizens running around. It's hard to get through. You look at Syria. Look at some of these other countries where you have everything's mixed up in these cities. It's horrible. You can't win a decisive victory that easily. You can't just drop a Moab bomb on it. That doesn't work. Also, China will likely intervene if there's a war, not to protect North Korea as a supposed ally, but to protect its own interests. So immediately, China will move to send troops in there to get control of the nuclear sites. They don't want the nuclear bombs going off, and prevent their use. And they'll likely get there before the U.S. forces do. And that'll be an awkward situation when U.S. forces arrive and Chinese are already there. That's not good. And if China does intervene, it will likely stabilize a post-war Korea on its own terms, not those of the United States or South Korea, and likely perpetuate further division. Okay, so those were some parallels. So I've tried to outline the promise of a unified Korea, and then I tried to point out the perils if the two Koreas do not unify. Okay? Everybody doing okay with this academic lecture so far? All right. More. Okay, let's do some more. Okay, vision of a heavenly Korea. This is more than a unified Korea. We're talking about a heavenly Korea. What will that look like? Well, I'm interested in the blessing ideal. How does that translate into public policy, right? So True Mother is the one that coined the term heavenly Korea in referring to Korea's national destiny. And then heavenly America, heavenly Japan, heavenly Africa. started from heavenly Korea. So what is True Mother's understanding of heavenly Korea? I mean, we can have some discussion about that, but my understanding is she envisions a nation that accepts the unification, marriage, blessing, and family ideal. Countries that accept the unification, marriage, blessing, and family ideal. And this is to be signified by the nation's president conducting or overseeing a holy blessing ceremony and the multiplication of marriage blessings at the grassroots level by tribal messiahs. Does that sound warm? I think the Mother has said that explicitly. That's her vision.
Exactly what you said, yeah.
I think so. So, but the question then is, but how does the unification marriage blessing transform Korean national identity and public policy? How is that then translated into all these other areas of politics and so forth? And my answer is that it will do so by fostering, number one, multiculturalism. South Korea is basically a monocultural nation, right? Korea will transform from a monocultural nation to a multicultural nation under a heavenly Korea. If you want a heavenly Korea, it will make that transition. And secondly, rather than being patriotic for Korea, it'll be what Father called transnational patriotism. Patriotism of the Korean people will transcend their loyalty to Korea and encompass the world. Okay, so what will that look like? First, multiculturalism. So Korea's national consciousness, North and South, has tended to be insular. Historically, Korea closed itself off as a hermit kingdom, right? So isolated. The North preaches a national ideology of juche, or self-sufficiency. That's consistent with that consciousness. And the South is far more integrated with the world's economy, but it still retains a strong commitment to ethnic and cultural homogeneity. You need to have Korean blood, basically. This has changed under the impact of South Korea's population crisis. I talked about the dire demographic situation there. The government is now supporting marriage migrants. They're mostly Chinese and Southeast Asia women who marry Korean men. An estimated 1/3 of all children born in 2020 are expected to be part Korean and part other Asian descent. That's significant. 1/3 of all children born by the year 2020 are expected to be part Korean and part Asian. I think they have a Korasian identity or something like that.
In Korea?
In Korea. Some see South Korea changing from a mono-ethnic to a multi-ethnic nation. I didn't invent that. That's from an article I read. So this is consistent with unification thinking, I believe. True parents promote exchange marriage, do they not? Isn't exchange marriage marriages between people of different races, cultures, and nationalities, and especially from former enemy nations? Isn't that what exchange marriage is? Yeah. So if the unification marriage culture takes root in a marriage, in Korea, one would expect to see this sort of thing. Also, don't true parents have the vision to set up international villages and living arrangements in Korea? I think True Mother is already at Cheongpyeong set up a French area and other,
American, Japanese.
yeah, sort of international village style culture. The Divine Principle says all the strands of world history meet on the Korean Peninsula. Doesn't that mean there should be no reason why Korea shouldn't welcome the world's people? If all the strands of world history meet on the Korean Peninsula, there's no reason why Korea shouldn't welcome the world's people. And also studies show that growth and innovation occur in multicultural environments, not monocultural environments. A unified Korea embracing this ideal will help spark a new global renaissance. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. This thing needs to manifest a transformation of Korean national identity. multiculturalism. The issue of transnational patriotism. True parents call upon Korea to embrace transnational patriotism. So True Father said, if Korea is to be a nation the world welcomes, the Koreans must become a people who willingly take the lead by shouldering the cross of the world. Shouldering the cross of the world. Once unified as a nation, Korea will not seek to exploit the world. Rather, it will be a true nation, one that sacrifices for the world. Of course, America is supposed to do that too. And historically, America did that to some extent after World War II. True Mother said the same thing in her 80,000 person Korea rally. She said, I will say this to the Korean people. We have received heaven's blessing. We must live lives in which we can share that blessing. What must we do for the global providence? The same kind of mindset. So as a divided nation, Korea had limited opportunities to exercise global leadership. Past policies had failed to achieve much due to continual breakdowns in the North-South relationship. And according to one commentator, this is like what you guys were saying this morning. There's already enough visions. There's already enough plans, roadmaps, and proposals. Enough talk.
That's right.
What is needed is a breakthrough in the stalled inter-Korean relationship. Breakthrough. The question is, do we have the breakthrough people in place now? It is to be hoped that the current efforts of Moon Jae-in, Kim Jong-un, and Donald Trump will achieve that breakthrough. They're not paying attention to anything. They're just plowing ahead. Are they the breakthrough personalities that are needed at this time in history? At the time of the fall of communism, there was elevated a bunch of people like Margaret Thatcher in England and Reagan in the United States, Pope John Paul, German Chancellor, Kohl, Helmut Kohl. They're all sort of on the same page. If we have a breakthrough, then a unified Korea, hopefully a heavenly Korea, will emerge as a major new player on the world stage. The end. Wow. Thank you.